What if the so-called champions of the world are not really solving crises, but meticulously staging a spectacle for all to see? Imagine waking each morning with the belief that your shoulders alone must bear the weight of saving the planet, ideally before breakfast, and always with the world's cameras pointed directly at you. This is not just the stuff of comic book fantasies. It is the very real mentality that seems to animate the actions of figures like Donald Trump, former President of the United States. For Trump, and increasingly for many global leaders, international affairs are not a matter of sober duty, but a sprawling drama, full of urgent declarations, surprise acts, and the ceaseless pursuit of the spotlight. Each headline, each swiftly imposed sanction or abrupt cancellation of a summit, feels less the product of careful strategy and more like a scene scripted for public consumption. During his term as president, Donald Trump appeared to approach global leadership much as a showrunner approaches a new season of television. Every day, a new crisis to solve, every moment, a chance to seize the narrative. In this world, the question is not whether the world is safer, but whether the audience is sufficiently engaged. Consider, for example, the dramatic cancellation of a summit with Vladimir Putin in Budapest. Rumors had swirled for days, only for Trump to cancel with no clear explanation, leaving analysts, diplomats, and journalists scrambling for answers. The cancellation itself became the story, eclipsing any substantive discussion that might have occurred. This tactic is not new. It echoes the Cold War era, when summits between American and Soviet leaders were often shrouded in secrecy, last-minute changes, and high-stakes theater. Yet the difference today lies in the degree to which the drama itself is the point. The spectacle, not the outcome, becomes the measure of success. Sanctions, too, have become part of the performance. In one recent episode, sweeping restrictions targeted not only Russian energy giants like Rosneft and Lukoil, but also more than 30 of their subsidiaries. The official rationale was thin. The time has come. There were no details, no concrete strategy, just the sense that decisions were being made on gut instinct, and that the performance mattered more than the plan. This is international policy by intuition, packaged for virality and public drama. It is worth recalling how, during the Cuban Missile Crisis of the early 1960s, every step was weighed with utmost caution, as the world teetered on the brink of nuclear war. John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev exchanged letters, tested each other's resolve, and calculated every move for both public consumption and real-world consequence. Yet even then, the theater was a means to an end. Today, it often seems that the end is the theater itself. Actions are made to look bold, but their logic is kept deliberately obscure. Summits are announced with fanfare, then abandoned days later. Sanctions land without warning, and leaders sidestep questions about their intentions. It is as if ambiguity itself is now a weapon, keeping everyone off balance, never sure what will happen next, or even why. This is a world built on uncertainty, where the old rules of engagement have been replaced by improvisation and spectacle. Military aid, too, has become a pageant. Debates over providing Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine unfold in public view. First, promises are made, then officials claim Ukrainian forces would need 6 months, or perhaps a whole year, of training. Finally comes the twist. We could do it, but we probably will not. The result is a dance of mixed signals, leaving allies and adversaries alike unsure of what to expect. It is a performance that keeps everyone guessing, but also erodes trust. This approach is not unique to the United States. In fact, it is increasingly the norm across the globe. Consider the Brexit negotiations, where British and European leaders staged dramatic walkouts, set impossible deadlines, and issued grandiose statements, only for deals to be reached in the 11th hour, or for talks to collapse and begin anew. The public was left bewildered, while the real discussions continued behind closed doors, far from the cameras. The danger of this spectacle is not just confusion. The real risk is that the drama distracts us from the consequences. Every impulsive gesture, every headline-grabbing move shapes the world around us, from security to the global economy, while the true motives remain hidden. Blink, and the script has changed again. But this is not merely the story of one leader, or even one nation. All across the global stage, the theater is only becoming more chaotic. The scramble for Russian assets and cracks in Western unity are peeling back the curtain, revealing even deeper uncertainty beneath the headlines. Let us focus on the battle over frozen Russian assets, a drama that is as much about financial power as it is about geopolitics. Behind the headlines of steadfast support for Ukraine, a fierce contest is brewing over a sum that dwarfs most national budgets: 140 billion euros in frozen Russian assets. The unity projected by Europe is, in reality, a fragile illusion. Governments are split over how, when, and even if this windfall should be tapped. Belgium, holding the largest single share of these assets, is quietly exerting its leverage. Their position is clear: no country should move alone, and no one should bear the risk solo. If Europe is to act, it must act together, or not at all. Any hint of unilateral action is quickly stamped out. This echoes the debates of the post-World War II era, when the Marshall Plan required unprecedented cooperation among European nations, despite deep-seated mistrust and competing interests. Ukraine, meanwhile, refuses to play the waiting game. Their demand is simple and urgent: release the funds now, with no strings attached. Let us decide how to use this money, even if that means purchasing weapons from whomever we choose. For a nation under siege, hesitation is a threat in itself. This sense of urgency recalls the Berlin airlift of 1948, when the Western Allies acted swiftly to break the Soviet blockade, delivering supplies by air rather than waiting for endless negotiations. Yet among Ukraine's supporters, harmony is in short supply. European leaders squabble over who will manage the money, who gets paid first, and whether these billions will fortify their own industries or vanish into American defense contracts. The underlying fear that this treasure, meant for Ukraine, might end up enriching factories an ocean away. All the while, the money remains an illusion. There is no legal approval, just declarations, draft budgets, and political theater. The billions stay locked in place as leaders debate, delay, and posture for the cameras. This recalls the years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when Western aid packages were announced with much fanfare, but often arrived slowly, tied up in bureaucracy and political wrangling. The risks in this standoff are enormous. A single misstep could cost Europe its economic edge, fracture fragile alliances, and poison trust between partners. For Ukraine, every delay means another day at the front without desperately needed aid. In the end, Ukraine's urgent appeals crash against the cold logic of Western politics, where promises often outpace action, and every gesture doubles as a move in a larger global game. This is not a new phenomenon. In the 1930s, the League of Nations issued strong statements against aggression, but failed to act decisively, leading ultimately to disaster. As the standoff drags on, old alliances strain and new cracks begin to show, revealing how fragile Western unity truly is. Behind each public promise, the real contest for power and profit only intensifies. When military aid is reduced to press releases and defense plans stretch for decades instead of months, what is truly shifting in Europe and Ukraine? Look closer. The headlines are loud, but the ground beneath us is quietly, unsettlingly unstable. Consider Ukraine's new agreements with Western partners. Announcements about Swedish Gripen fighter jets or expanded security deals sound momentous. Yet these are often just promises on paper. The jets themselves may not arrive for years, if at all. Declarations fill the air, but real weapons are scarce. This is not an isolated case. What is called tangible aid is often just optimistic pledges, vague frameworks, or lines of conditional credit. Western leaders signal unity, but the real details are hidden in fine print. There is a growing gulf between what is announced and what actually reaches the battlefield. Meanwhile, European governments are beginning to reckon with a harder truth. Behind closed doors, leaders are shifting from grand speeches to real rearmament. Defense budgets are being increased, mobilization plans revived, and local arms factories are working overtime. War is no longer a distant scenario. It is a logistical challenge, measured in years, not news cycles. Inside NATO, planning is no longer theoretical. It is about contracts, supply chains, and readiness targets. Military bases are expanding, warehouses filling, and strategies revised. Leaders may still talk about peace, but on the ground, preparations for conflict are accelerating. This is reminiscent of the arms race in the early 20th century, when European powers, believing that military preparedness would deter conflict, ended up priming the continent for war. The discrepancy between words and actions is striking. The public story remains one of peace, diplomacy, and stability. But under the surface, the machinery of war is spinning faster. In the contest between words and actions, it is the hidden engines that will decide the outcome. But if the big promises are mostly smoke and mirrors, what is actually moving behind the scenes? To follow the real trail, we have to look at the money and the scramble over Russia's frozen assets. How can you tell when a peace proposal is genuine and when it is just another move in a high-stakes global performance? In modern international politics, every handshake, threat, or awkward pause is rarely what it seems. Beneath the promises of peace, there is a far more complicated game unfolding, one that edges us closer to crisis, even as leaders claim the opposite. Take Russia, for example. Moscow is not making any grand gestures right now. Instead, it is choosing to wait, listen, and let others fill the air with noise. In diplomacy, silence does not always mean weakness. Sometimes it signals that the next move will be coldly calculated rather than reckless. A warning, not a retreat. This approach has historical precedent. During the Yalta Conference of 1945, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin often remained silent during negotiations, forcing his counterparts to reveal more and thus gaining strategic advantage. On the Western side, governments blend talk of values and peace with relentless competition for resources, markets, and influence. For every speech about defending democracy, there is a fresh round of sanctions, shadowy arms deals, or new military plans drawn up behind closed doors. The public sees the headlines, but the real contest unfolds in secret meetings and boardrooms, far from the cameras. Watch closely as legal, financial, and military strategies play out. These moves rarely solve today's crisis. Instead, they are designed to shape tomorrow's battlefield by seizing frozen assets, redrawing alliances, or setting legal traps for future rivals. The goal is not immediate resolution, but long-term leverage for the next phase of competition. This echoes the so-called Great Game of the 19th century, when British and Russian empires maneuvered for decades over Central Asia, laying the groundwork for future struggles. Meanwhile, ordinary people are handed slogans: peace, stability, security. Leaders repeat these words endlessly, even as their actions, tightening sanctions, calling off negotiations, building up arsenals, drag us further from those ideals. The real policies drift toward greater danger and uncertainty, leaving the public grasping for clarity in a fog of official language. This is why critical thinking is more necessary than ever. Do not accept headlines or official statements at face value. Ask yourself, who benefits from this policy? Who stands to lose? Beneath the surface, what is truly at stake? Money, power, or something even deeper? In this era, failing to read between the lines can mean missing real security threats, misreading the economic landscape, or misunderstanding where world events are actually headed. So how should you respond when all the world's a stage and every move is strategic? The answer is not simple, but it begins with sharpening your awareness and questioning every narrative. In the next section, we will explore practical ways to see through the performance and protect your own interests. To bring this down to earth, let us imagine a few practical scenarios. Suppose you hear a leader announce a major new alliance with much fanfare. Rather than taking the announcement at face value, ask, what is actually being promised? Are there concrete details or just broad statements? Is there a history of similar promises being kept or broken? For example, The North Atlantic Treaty Organization has, on several occasions, announced new security guarantees to member states. But the level of real commitment has varied greatly depending on political winds. Or imagine seeing news about sweeping sanctions. Consider, who will these sanctions really hurt? Often, the most dramatic sanctions are designed to send a message, but may have little practical effect on the intended targets. The American embargo against Cuba, for instance, has endured for decades, but arguably has done more to entrench positions than to achieve meaningful change. When you hear about military aid, look for specifics. Are weapons actually being delivered, or is the aid merely a pledge for the future? Is there a clear timeline, or just an open-ended promise? The difference can be critical. During the Vietnam War, the slow pace of promised American support often left South Vietnamese forces vulnerable, despite optimistic reports in the press. To protect your own interests and better understand the world, cultivate a habit of skepticism. Read multiple sources, especially those with differing perspectives. Learn to distinguish between real actions and symbolic gestures. When possible, look beyond the headlines to the underlying data, budgets, contracts, and legal agreements. It is also useful to study historical parallels. Ask, how have similar situations unfolded in the past? What patterns tend to repeat? During the lead-up to World War I, for example, European leaders made a series of public declarations about peace, even as they mobilized armies behind the scenes. The disconnect between rhetoric and reality proved catastrophic. Finally, engage in civic dialogue. Discuss these issues with others, test your ideas, and refine your understanding. The more informed the public is, the harder it becomes for leaders to rely solely on spectacle and performance. Next time you see a world leader standing before the cameras, ask yourself, what story are they really telling, and who benefits from the script? Today's international politics is less a forum for reasoned negotiation and more a stage for relentless spectacle. Every wave of a hand, every grave warning, each new alliance or rupture. These are scenes meticulously crafted for global audiences, even as anxiety and risk multiply just out of frame. Western powers, Ukraine and Russia, are now entangled in a contest where sanctions, military deployments, and the frantic hunt for billions in frozen assets fuel an atmosphere thick with tension. Yet, behind the curtains, the rules keep changing. Even the key players may not grasp the full plot. The boundary between diplomatic dialogue and performative theater blurs, while the stakes, national security, economic futures, even human lives, remain intensely, dangerously real. Consider how much of what you witness is pure showmanship. Announcements of new sanctions arrive with dramatic flair, but their true consequences are often shrouded in layers of political theater. Leaders invoke peace while missile arsenals quietly expand. Allies spar or unite, sometimes to sway the media, sometimes to secure funding. Each maneuver, whether it is the abrupt cancellation of a summit or a headline-stealing speech, amplifies uncertainty, sending tremors across continents. If you accept appearances at face value, you risk missing the deeper game. Misreading these performances does more than color public opinion. It can sway markets, reshape alliances, and ultimately, determine how safe you and your loved ones really are. The price of being fooled by these spectacles is paid in lost stability, squandered opportunities, and the ever-present shadow of conflict. So, when a world leader makes another bold announcement, pause before believing the act. Look past the spotlight. Whose interests are truly at stake? What pressures are being veiled? And what deals are being struck out of sight? In a world where power, wealth, and safety hang by a thread, only the most vigilant observers can hope to pierce the smoke and mirrors. Stay alert. The real stories are seldom on center stage. They wait in the shadows, seen only by those who know how to look. And as the curtains fall on today's performance, remember, the world is not saved in a single act. It is shaped, day by day, by those who dare to look behind the spectacle, to question, to learn, and to act with open eyes and steady hands.